Hey guys, Alan here. Hey, with our Bible moment. Thanks for being with me again. We're staying into the book of Proverbs here. In fact, we're staying in the same chapter we was at last week, which we're in chapter 4 here of Proverbs. I'm going to kind of catch up just a little bit, just kind of catch the first few verses, and then we'll catch the last piece of this. So, one of the big things that Solomon really pushed here was the value in this legacy of wisdom. The fact that, number one, we need to come up with wisdom, but we need to pass it on, pass it on, pass it on. It is definitely something one of his themes here as we look at it. And as we look at Proverbs 4:1, he says, "Hear, O son, a father's instruction, and be attentive," he says there. And then he goes on, and in Deuteronomy, I'm going to kick over real quick just because it was a verse that I kind of pulled into this last week. In Deuteronomy 30:19, I think really it even though this isn't by Solomon, I think it has a lot to say. He says, "I call heaven and earth to record this day against you, that I have set before you life and death, blessings and cursings. Therefore choose life, that both thou and thy seed may live." So he talks about this father's instruction, and Solomon passes the wisdom he's received on from his own parents, and he's passing this on to his sons here. And I think, again, it shows that importance of passing it from generation to generation. Wisdom it's described here to us as the principal thing, the most important thing. Knowledge and wisdom, knowledge and wisdom. And we jump down to verse 7, it says, "Get wisdom, and whatsoever you get insight." Wow. And then he goes on, and we'll catch some other verses here in just a second. But there's rewards that he's telling us that go along with this wisdom we talked about last week. It'll protect us. It'll exalt us. It'll honor us if we do that. So he talks about that down in verses 6-9. And then I'm gonna pick up here just a little bit lower here, just a second. And he talks to us about the path of righteousness. And that's kind of where we want to look here, the paths of righteousness. And what are the two opposites of this when we look at it? The two paths and how they're contrasted, that's where we're really going to look at today. But before I really catch that, I want us to look at something, chapters 1, 2, 3, and 4. I want you to look at the first part of this. In Proverbs 1:8, he says, "Hear, my son, your father's instruction, and forsake not your mother's teaching." He says that in Proverbs 1. We skip down to Proverbs 2, and in Proverbs 2:1, he says, "My son, if you receive my words and treasure up my commandments." He goes on. Now he talks again about taking his words and listening to his wisdom here. We skip down into chapter 3, and it says in verse 1, "My son, do not forget my teaching, but let your heart keep my commandments." And then in chapter 4 we talked about last week, "Hear, O sons, a father's instruction, and be attentive, that ye may gain insight." We read that a few moments ago. So he's going to talk about here, picking up in verse number 10, going through verse number 19, he's going to talk to us here about these two contrasted paths here. So as we look at this, he continues to talk to us about this value of wisdom and the instruction he's trying to pass on here to his sons. And to the fact they need to make this clear choice. There's two opposites in their life, and they need to pick life, not death. So first of all, let's look at this path of righteousness. I'm going to jump all the way down to verse 18, then we're going to come back up to verse 10. But in verse 18, it says, "But the path of righteousness is like the light of dawn, which shines brighter and brighter until full day." He takes and he talks to us here about the paths of righteousness, the path of godliness. That at first it's just kind of like that breaking of the dawn where you can kind of see. I was talking to a guy yesterday. He was in my office. We was talking about how hot it was going to be for this weekend. He says, well, I'm playing golf in the morning, but he says, I've got the very first tee off. And I was talking about what time they'd let him tee off. He says, as soon as I can see the ball. And so we think about this dawn, this light at dawn. And as the morning comes up, it shines brighter and it shines brighter. And then finally it comes down to full day where we can see really clearly. So following this way, it leads us to this long life. It's secure steps here. And it gives us this freedom from possibly stumbling and falling on our face. A few years ago, and this isn't funny whatsoever, but Margie and I was walking. Doctor had changed her medications around, and I mean, just something happened, and she just fell flat on her face. And even to this day, she still has problems with her nose because of that falling flat on her face. And we don't want to fall on our face. Let's learn by somebody else's wisdom that they can pour into us. You know, we don't want to spiritually fall on our face here. Proverbs, the 4th chapter, I told you we'd kick back to verse 10. He says, hear my son, and accept my words, that the years of your life may be many. Notice, he relates wisdom and knowledge to a longer life. Going on to verse 11, he says, I have taught you the way of wisdom. I have led you in the paths of uprightness. We need to go back and remember the way that God has directed us to live our lives. So many times, I think within our lives, we take and we start, especially as we get older, we think, well, you know, it can't be that important. But I want to think of this as not just our earthly father, but our Heavenly Father, who's instructed us in all these ways of wisdom. And he says we're going to have long life if we follow it. And he says we're going to have the path here of uprightness. And in verse 12 it says, when you walk, your steps will not be hampered. And if you run, you will not stumble. We talk about that stumbling again. And we don't want to fall, or we don't want to stumble. We want to run the race God has given us. And then he contrasts it over to the path of the wicked. The path of the wicked, it's like this deep, deep darkness where the wicked, they take and they stumble and they fall on unseen obstacles, he says in verse 19. And so let's read verse 19 real quick. And it says, the way of the wicked is like deep darkness. They do not know over what they stumble. It's not just that they fall and they fall flat on their face. They have no idea why they even did it. They can't rest, it talks about, until they've committed evil. Eating the bread of wickedness, he talks about, and drinking the wine of violence. So let's pick up here in verse 14. Proverbs 4:14. Do not enter the path of the wicked, and do not walk in the way of evil. Stay away. Watch your associations. What associations do you have with people? Look for godly people that are going to point you directly towards what you should do. Verse 15, he says, I'm going to pick up in verse 14, read it one more time just so we can kind of come into verse 15. He says, do not enter the path of the wicked and do not walk in the way of the evil. Avoid it. Do not go on it. Turn away from it and pass on. And then he goes in verse 16, but we just kind of talked about briefly. For they cannot sleep until they have done wrong. They have robbed of sleep unless they have made someone stumble. See, these type of people, they're not out for us. They're out for themselves. And they have a wicked heart. And then we're going to catch the last little bit of this chapter here. I'm going to try to catch it. And just this practical practice of wisdom he's going to talk about, going from verse 20 through 27. It's not enough the fact that we just know what we need to do. It's not just knowledge. It's putting the knowledge into action is what it really is. The final verse in verse 27, I'm going to go to the very last verse before we come back up. He says, do not swear. Do not swerve to the right or to the left. Turn your foot away from evil. That final verse, it offers really some practical applications for living our life of wisdom, doesn't it? Do not take and swerve to the right or to the left. Keep your foot away from evil. He says, walk that straight, narrow way. I'm going to pick it up here, though, and I want to catch and read all of 20 through 27 here just real quick. And he says in verse 20, my son, be attentive to my words. Incline your ear to my sayings. Let them not escape from your sight. Keep them within thy heart. The heart, remember, it's where everything flows out of. It is who we are. Verse 22, for they are life to those who find them, and healing to all their flesh. Keep your heart with all vigilance, for from it flows springs of life. Verse 24, put it away from your crooked speech, and put devious talk far from you. Let your eyes look directly forward. Again, he talks about the path, stay on the path. Now he says, keep your eyes straight forward, and your gaze to be straight before you, straight on the Lord Jesus Christ. Ponder the path of your feet. Then all your ways will be sure. If we stay focused, our eyes on Jesus, and we stay focused with following what the Bible tells us, he says our way is going to be sure. And then that's where he kicks in with verse 27 that I started out with. Do not swerve to the right or to the left. Turn your foot away from evil. I think, we have to really guard our heart. The most famous verse of the chapter here warns the reader to take and guard your heart. Guard it with all diligence. Because we need to remember from it flows springs of life. So this emphasis that we're talking about here, it's one of inner life. It's the source of all of our actions and all of our interactions. Guard your mouth, he talks about. Guard your feet. It talks about discipline that we need to have within our life. In verse 24, it says, the mouth, put away, perverse mouth and crooked lips. In verse 25, he says the eyes look straight ahead and fix and gaze on what's right here. In verse 26 and 7, he talks about the feet. Consider your steps and turn your feet away from evil. So these two ways are contrasted to us. It shows us life. It shows us how that we can live a successful Christian life. Hey, thanks. This is Alan. Thanks for being with me so much, and we will catch up just a little bit later.